The only child syndrome, truth or myth? Unraveling the mystery. Hello everyone. Today we're diving into an interesting topic that many of you have probably heard of, the only child syndrome. Are only children really selfish, lonely, or overly spoiled as the rumors suggest? Or is this just a centuries-old misunderstanding? Let's find out whether the only child syndrome actually exists by exploring research findings and expert perspectives. First, let's take a quick overview. Back in the late 19th century, psychologists G. Stanley Hall and E. W. Bohannon claimed that only children often displayed negative traits such as selfishness, poor social skills, and being spoiled. However, later studies have debunked these ideas, showing that only children aren't much different from those who grow up with siblings. In fact, only children might even excel in areas like academic performance and their relationships with parents. Experts now generally agree that the only child syndrome might simply be a stereotype. And a child's personality is influenced by many factors, not just whether they have siblings or not. Now, let's dig deeper into each part of this story. The origins of the only child syndrome. Have you ever heard someone say, "Oh, must be an only child, that's why"? The term, only child syndrome, became a familiar way to describe children who were thought to be selfish or difficult to get along with. But where did this idea actually come from? In the late 1800s, psychologists G. Stanley Hall and E. W. Bohannon conducted surveys to study children's personalities. Their results surprised many. They labeled only children as having negative traits, spoiled, socially awkward, and even considered being an only child a sort of disease. They concluded that children would develop better if they grew up with siblings. However, these early studies weren't exactly reliable. They lacked scientific rigor and had many flaws. Nevertheless, the idea of the only child syndrome spread and took root in public thinking. Some later studies supported the concept to some extent. But even today, it remains a mystery that hasn't been fully unraveled. Were we too quick to believe in a stereotype born more than a century ago? Traits attributed to only child syndrome. Imagine what an only child looks like through the eyes of those who believe in the syndrome. A little boy or girl spoiled by their parents. Demanding, self-centered, and struggling to make friends. Sound familiar? According to Hall's research, only children were often labeled with traits such as selfishness, bossiness, loneliness, and even antisocial tendencies. People believed that because only children had their needs constantly met by their parents, they became spoiled and self-focused. The absence of siblings was seen as a reason for their supposed lack of social skills. Feelings of isolation and difficulty fitting in. Some even claimed that these traits would follow them into adulthood, making them overly sensitive to criticism, poor team players, or socially inept. But wait, is this really true? More recent research says otherwise. Scientists have found that only children aren't significantly different from those with siblings when it comes to personality traits. They aren't necessarily more selfish or antisocial. These negative stereotypes seem more like subjective opinions rather than conclusions based on solid evidence. Could it be that we've been unfairly labeling only children all along? What does research really say? Let's take a closer look at how scientists have explored this topic over the years. Over the past century, a wealth of research has been conducted to verify whether only children really display the negative traits they've been accused of. In the 1970s, some studies in Quebec suggested that only children aged 6 to 11 were at a higher risk for psychological disorders. But just a few years later, another research group reported no significant differences between only children and children with siblings in this regard. Confusing, right? Interestingly, although only children often receive more parental attention, this doesn't necessarily make them selfish or narcissistic. In fact, it can actually be beneficial. Psychologist Tony Falbo, a leading expert on only children, has spent over 40 years studying this topic. In a 1977 review, she pointed out that the special attention only children receive often leads to academic success and healthy personality development. Only children also tend to have closer relationships with their parents and may feel less need to seek external validation, having already been fully loved and supported at home. Another meta-analysis by Falbo, based on 115 studies, found that only children actually outperform their peers in several areas: intelligence, achievement, personality, adaptability, and family relationships. So instead of being burdened by a negative syndrome, only children might actually enjoy surprising advantages. What do experts say about the only child syndrome? By now, you might be wondering, does the only child syndrome even exist at all? Let's hear from the experts. Many psychologists agree that what we call only child syndrome is probably just a stereotype. Think back to Hall's time, when most families lived in rural areas. An only child back then might have spent more time around adults and had fewer opportunities to socialize with peers. This could lead to behaviors like shyness or difficulty fitting in, but these issues were caused by circumstances, not by the fact of being an only child. Today, only children growing up in cities have countless ways to interact with others, through schools, parks, extracurricular activities, and even online friendships. They are far from isolated as many still assume. Experts emphasize that a child's personality is shaped by a complex mix of factors: genetics, environment, parenting styles, not merely whether they have siblings or not. It's also worth noting that whenever an only child behaves poorly, people are quick to blame the syndrome. But similar behaviors occur among children with siblings too. So why single out only children? Therefore, if your only child seems shy or reserved, don't rush to blame it on the absence of siblings. It might simply be part of who they are. What matters most is understanding that being an only child does not inherently lead to negative traits. They can be just as confident, sociable, and successful as anyone else. Conclusion: through this exploration, we can see that the only child syndrome is likely just a story spun from incomplete research over a century ago. Instead of worrying that your only child might turn out selfish or lonely, focus on raising them with love, guidance, and the right values. Whether a child has siblings or not, every child is a unique individual, full of their own special potential. Thank you for joining me in uncovering this fascinating story. What are your thoughts on the only child syndrome? Feel free to share your perspective.